Picture this: a dimly lit chamber deep within an ancient Egyptian tomb, the air thick with the scent of incense and the murmur of priests in ceremonial robes. Their voices rise and fall in rhythmic chants, reciting words of power so potent they were believed to pierce the veil between life and death. This was no ordinary funeral rite. It was a sacred journey, a meticulous preparation for the soul's passage into eternity. At the heart of this ritual lay the Book of the Dead, a collection of spells so vital that without them, the deceased might wander forever in darkness, lost to the terrors of the underworld. These weren't just prayers, they were tools, weapons even, designed to outwit demons, appease gods, and unlock the gates to paradise. And among them, 23 spells stood out as the most powerful, the most mysterious, the very keys to immortality itself. What if I told you that these ancient incantations weren't merely superstition, but a carefully crafted system of magic, a roadmap to the afterlife so precise it shaped an entire civilization's understanding of death and beyond? The Egyptians didn't just fear the unknown, they mapped it, named it, and armed their dead with the knowledge to conquer it. Imagine holding a spell so potent it could silence the jaws of a serpent god, or so wise it could outwit the 42 judges of the underworld. These weren't fantasies. To them, this was survival, the stakes, eternal oblivion, or a seat among the stars. So how did these spells work? Who decided which words held such power? And what can they teach us about humanity's oldest obsession, cheating death? Today, we're unraveling the secrets of the Book of the Dead, spell by spell, from the incantations that opened the mouth of the deceased to speak in the afterlife, to the ones that transformed them into divine beings capable of walking with the gods. This is more than history. It's a window into the minds of people who refused to accept that death was the end. By the time we're done, you'll see these spells not as relics, but as a testament to the boundless human imagination, and the lengths we'll go to conquer the unknown. The journey begins now. The story of the Book of the Dead begins centuries before its famous papyrus scrolls were ever inscribed, rooted in the sacred walls of Egypt's earliest pyramids. Originally, these powerful spells weren't written for just anyone. They were royal secrets, carved directly into the burial chambers of pharaohs during the Old Kingdom. Known as the Pyramid Texts, they were a collection of over 700 incantations meant to propel kings into the afterlife, their words etched in stone so they'd echo through eternity. But as time passed, something extraordinary happened. The elite demanded access to these divine tools. By the Middle Kingdom, the spells had migrated from pyramid walls to the coffins of nobles, evolving into what we now call the coffin texts. No longer restricted to royalty, this was the democratization of immortality. Then came the real revolution. Around 1550, before the Common Era, scribes began transcribing these spells onto papyrus scrolls, creating portable, personalized guides tailored to each individual's journey through the afterlife. Imagine a handbook where every spell could be curated, some omitted, others emphasized based on what the deceased might face beyond the grave. Wealthier clients commissioned lavish scrolls with intricate illustrations, while simpler versions were crafted for those with modest means. The most famous of these, the Papyrus of Anet, stretches over 78 feet long, a masterpiece of hieroglyphs and vivid scenes depicting the scribe An's passage through the underworld. But who brought these words to life? Scribes trained in temple schools meticulously copied the spells, sometimes adding unique flourishes for their patrons. Mistakes were rare. These weren't just texts, they were sacred contracts with the divine. A single error could mean the difference between paradise and peril. And while the wealthy could afford extensive collections, even ordinary Egyptians scraped together resources for at least a few crucial spells. After all, how could you face the weighing of your heart without the right words to tip the scales in your favor? What's fascinating is how these spells functioned. They weren't passive prayers, they were active, almost like magical software programmed to trigger at specific moments in the afterlife. Speak spell 34 and your heart wouldn't betray you before Osiris. Recite spell 125 and you could navigate the labyrinth of demon gatekeepers. This wasn't religion as we think of it today. It was a cosmic toolkit, a blend of poetry and power designed to hack the system of the underworld. And as we'll soon see, some of these spells held secrets so profound, they blurred the line between mortal and God. To understand the spells of the Book of the Dead, you first have to grasp the beating heart of ancient Egyptian belief, a force they called heka. More than just magic, heka was the very fabric of creation, the divine energy that flowed through gods, pharaohs, and even ordinary people. Imagine it as the operating system of the universe, a power so fundamental that the gods themselves used it to shape the world. Unlike modern superstitions, heka wasn't about luck or chance. It was a precise science, a sacred technology where words, gestures, and rituals could alter reality itself. Priests weren't just spiritual leaders, they were master magicians trained in the art of wielding heka with surgical precision. A single mispronounced syllable in a spell could render it useless or worse, invite chaos. Take the myth of Isis, who tricked the sun god Ra into revealing his secret name by crafting a serpent from his own saliva, a brilliant act of heka that gave her power even over the king of the gods. This wasn't folklore to the Egyptians, it was proof that magic, when executed correctly, could bend the cosmos to one's will, but heka wasn't reserved for temples and tombs. It seeped into every corner of daily life. A farmer might whisper a spell to protect his crops from locusts. A mother would tie an amulet around her child's neck to ward off illness. Even love had its own spells. One papyrus describes a ritual to make a woman follow a man like a cow after grass. These weren't desperate wishes, they were deliberate acts backed by centuries of tradition and belief in the tangible power of words. What set Egyptian magic apart was its structure. Spells often followed a strict formula, an invocation to a god, a recounting of mythological precedent, and a command, sometimes even a threat, to compel the divine. For example, a healer treating a snake bite might recite, "Just as Horus was saved from the venom of Set's serpent, so too shall this poison be undone." The past wasn't just history, it was a playbook of proven results, a way to tap into the same divine victories that shaped the world. And nowhere was heka more critical than in the journey beyond death. The afterlife wasn't a passive reward, it was a gauntlet of trials where the soul had to prove its worth, outsmart demons, and literally reassemble its own body. Without the right spells, even the purest heart could fail. That's why the Book of the Dead wasn't just a collection of prayers, it was a survival manual, a collection of cheat codes for the ultimate game, eternity. And as we'll see next, some of these spells held secrets so potent they could turn a mortal into something nearly divine. The Duat wasn't just an underworld, it was a gauntlet, a shadowy realm where every step could mean salvation or eternal ruin. Picture a labyrinth of flaming lakes and serpent-infested corridors, guarded by demons with knives for fingers and crocodiles who knew your true name. This was no peaceful afterlife, it was an obstacle course designed to test the worthiness of every soul daring to seek eternity. At the center of it all stood Osiris, the green-skinned god of the dead, waiting to judge the heart of the deceased in a ceremony that would decide their fate. But here's the catch, the Egyptians believed death wasn't an end but a performance. one where every line had to be delivered perfectly, every spell recited without flaw. The most critical moment came at the Hall of Mat, where the deceased's heart was placed on a golden scale against the feather of truth. If the heart, heavy with sin, tipped the balance, a monstrous creature named Amet, part lion, part hippo, part crocodile, would devour it on the spot, erasing the soul forever. But if the scales stayed even, the gates of paradise swung open. This wasn't just about morality, it was about preparation. Spells from the Book of the Dead acted as cosmic counterweights, whispering to the scales, "Ignore this misdeed," or "Remember this act of kindness." One spell even instructed the heart not to betray its owner, pleading, "Do not stand against me in testimony." Yet the weighing of the heart was just one trial. Before reaching Osiris, the soul had to navigate 12 gates, each manned by a demon who demanded the correct password. Some gates were guarded by fire-spitting serpents, others required the deceased to proclaim their innocence in front of 42 divine judges. Without the right spell, recited with perfect precision, the soul would be turned back, or worse, consumed. Spell 144 gave the names of every gatekeeper, while Spell 17 provided the secret gestures to pacify them. It was like a high-stakes escape room where the clues were written in advance, but one slip meant game over, and the soul itself wasn't a single entity. The Egyptians believed in a fragmented afterlife existence, the Ka, a life force that needed food and drink offerings to survive, the Ba, a bird with a human head that could fly between the tomb and the Duat, and the Ak, a radiant, perfected form achieved only after passing all trials. Spells ensured these parts reunited each night, like a cosmic reboot preventing spiritual decay. All of this hinged on the very first spell, the opening incantation that awakened the soul to its journey. Often called the spell for going out into the day, it didn't just begin the voyage, it set the tone for every challenge ahead. Imagine whispering words so potent they could unseal the tomb's door, letting the soul step into the Duat armed with divine knowledge. This was the key to the entire system, the spark that ignited the engine of resurrection. Without it, even the most elaborate spells were useless, and with it, the difference between wandering in darkness and walking among the stars. Among all the spells in the Book of the Dead, none held more immediate urgency than the ritual known as the opening of the mouth. Imagine being trapped in a preserved body, your senses dulled by the mummification process, unable to speak, eat, or even breathe in the afterlife. That's where this first spell intervened, a sacred reawakening that transformed the silent, motionless mummy into a living, speaking entity once more. Picture a priest dressed in leopard skin, standing before the deceased with a ceremonial adze, a tool shaped like the constellation Ursa Major. As he touched the mummy's lips with the blade, he chanted words so potent they could, according to belief, restore the dead to a state of divine alertness. The actual hieroglyphic invocation reads like a cosmic command. "My mouth is opened by Ptah, my mouth's bonds are loosed by my city god." Thoth comes fully equipped with spells, and he releases the bindings over my mouth. This wasn't poetry, it was a functional spell, a verbal key that unlocked the soul's ability to interact with the afterlife. Without it, the deceased would remain mute, unable to defend themselves before Osiris or even consume the offerings left in their tomb. The ritual didn't stop at the mouth. Priests would anoint the eyes, ears, and nostrils with oils, symbolically restoring every sense, every connection to the world beyond. But why was speech so vital? Because in Egyptian belief, words didn't just describe reality, they shaped it. A soul that couldn't speak couldn't recite the other spells needed to navigate the Duat. Silence meant powerlessness. This ritual mirrored the myth of Osiris himself, dismembered by Set and later revived by his son Horus, who used the same adze to restore his father's breath and voice. By reenacting this divine moment, priests weren't just performing a ceremony, they were tapping into the original magic that resurrected a god, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The opening of the mouth wasn't merely about sustenance, it was about identity, a soul that couldn't speak its name before the gods would vanish into oblivion, unrecognized and unremembered. This spell was the first step in a journey where every word, every gesture carried the weight of eternity. And as the soul's voice returned, it would soon need the next crucial tool, a spell to repel the shadows that lurked beyond the tomb's threshold, waiting to swallow the unprepared. If the opening of the mouth restored the soul's voice, the next challenge was far more visceral, surviving the all-consuming darkness of the Duat. Picture a blackness so absolute it smothered sound, stifled breath, and erased all sense of direction. This wasn't mere absence of light. The Egyptians believed it was a living force, a primordial void that predated creation itself. To be lost here meant dissolution, the soul unraveling like a frayed thread. But Spell 2 offered a weapon against this terror, a declaration so bold it split the shadows like a blade. "I am the flame that parts the night," the deceased would proclaim, the unquenchable light that Apophis himself cannot swallow. The imagery here wasn't just poetic, it was cosmological. Apophis, the serpent of chaos, sought to devour the sun god Ra each night as he journeyed through the underworld. By invoking Ra's victory, the spell tapped into a divine precedent, turning the soul into a miniature sun capable of repelling the same eternal darkness. The text even describes the deceased's body glowing with the brilliance of 1,000 torches, a direct echo of solar barges that cut through the Duat's abyss. This wasn't just about visibility, it was about asserting identity in a realm designed to erase it. Yet the spell's power went deeper. The darkness it banished was also metaphorical, the ignorance that could doom a soul to wander blindly past vital gates or miss hidden trials. Knowledge was light, and light was survival. One version of the spell instructs the deceased to name every shadow they encounter, stripping the void of its anonymity. Demons feared the spoken word. By labeling the unseen, the soul robbed the darkness of its power to conceal threats. This incantation also reveals a fascinating duality in Egyptian magic. While some spells begged the gods for mercy, this one commanded the elements. "The night parts before me as flax under the weaver's hand." It declares a metaphor rooted in daily life, comparing the soul's power to the sure strokes of a craftsman. The message was clear. In the afterlife, hesitation meant annihilation. But with the right words, even chaos could be unraveled. Yet light alone wasn't enough. Beyond the darkness lurked beings far more tangible, creatures with teeth like daggers and a hunger for souls unprepared to face them. The next spell wouldn't just illuminate the path, it would arm the deceased against the jaws waiting in the shadows. Standing between the soul and paradise was Amet, the ultimate arbiter of doom, a creature stitched together from nightmares. With the hindquarters of a hippo, the mane and forebody of a lion, and the gaping jaws of a crocodile, she crouched beside the scales of judgment, waiting to feast on hearts heavy with deceit. The Egyptians didn't just fear her, they named her Devourer of the Dead, a title that echoed through tombs like a warning. But Spell 3 in the Book of the Dead wasn't about fleeing Amet. It was about facing her armed with words sharper than her teeth. The strategy was twofold. Some versions of the spell called upon Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, to act as a cosmic defense attorney. "Let Thoth stand between me and my reckoning," the deceased would declare, "for his tongue knows the truth even when my heart trembles." Others took a bolder approach, asserting direct lineage to the gods. "I am the son of Osiris, born of Isis," one passage claims, framing the soul not as a supplicant, but as divinity itself, untouchable by mere monsters. This wasn't just boasting, it was a legal maneuver, a way to sidestep judgment by rewriting identity. A painted vignette from the Papyrus of Hunnifer shows this battle of wills in vivid detail. The scribe stands calm before Amet, his arms raised not in fear but in command. Above him, Thoth records the verdict while Anubis adjusts the scales. But the real power lies in the hieroglyphs swirling around the scene. Spell 3 in action, a verbal shield against annihilation. What's striking is Amet's posture. She isn't lunging, she's frozen, as if the words themselves have leashed her hunger. This spell reveals a profound psychological insight. The Duat wasn't just a physical landscape, it was a mirror for the soul's deepest terrors. By giving the deceased a script to confront Amet, the Book of the Dead transformed passive dread into active defiance. It was the ultimate pep talk, whispered across centuries. You are not prey. You are a contender, yet surviving judgment was only half the battle. Beyond the scales lay a labyrinth of gates and corridors, each more treacherous than the last. And that's where the next spell came in, a celestial roadmap, etched not on papyrus but in the very stars. Beyond the judgment hall lay the true test, a gauntlet of 21 gates, each more harrowing than the last. These weren't mere doorways, they were sentient thresholds guarded by demons who demanded more than passage. They required intimacy. To cross, the deceased had to whisper each guardian's true name, a secret so potent it forced the creature to step aside. Spell 4 in the Book of the Dead was less an incantation and more a dossier, cataloging every gatekeeper's identity down to their preferred offerings and hidden weaknesses. Take the third gate, for example, where the demon, he who prevents charcoal, stood with a serpent coiled around his neck. The spell instructed the soul to declare, I know you, slithering one whose breath reeks of burnt offerings. I bring the scent of juniper to soothe your fury. This wasn't just flattery, it was psychological warfare, exploiting the demon's own nature against it. Other gatekeepers required threats, invoking the wrath of Thoth or Ra to bully them into compliance. One particularly cunning passage even mimicked the voice of Osiris himself, tricking the guardian into believing the soul was its master. The parallels to modern security are uncanny. Imagine a labyrinth of password-protected doors where each code is a fragment of mythology. Recite the wrong name, and the system locks you out permanently. The stakes couldn't be higher. A single mispronounced syllable might leave the soul trapped in a corridor of scorpions or hurled into a lake of fire. That's why wealthy Egyptians often hired scribes to customize these spells, adding phonetic cues like say it with a hiss or pause before the last syllable to ensure perfection. But the true genius of Spell 4 lies in what it reveals about Egyptian theology. Knowledge wasn't just power, it was currency. By demanding the names of these creatures, the spell forced the deceased to study the underworld's bureaucracy, to understand its hierarchies and loopholes. This wasn't blind faith, it was a masterclass in celestial negotiation. And for those who memorized every demon, every turn, the final reward wasn't just passage, it was transformation. Beyond the last gate waited spells that didn't just protect the soul, but remade it into something radiant, something almost divine. The moment of transformation was at hand, not just survival in the afterlife, but ascension. After navigating judgment and outwitting demons, the soul faced its most audacious trial yet, shedding its mortal remnants to become an Ak, a radiant being of pure light. This wasn't mere immortality, it was divinity itself, a fusion with the cosmos so complete that the deceased could stride alongside Orion in the night sky. Spell 5 of the Book of the Dead held the key, a declaration so bold it blurred the line between human and God. I am Orion, piercing the sky. My strides are the strides of Thoth, my voice the thunder of Ra. To understand this spell's power, you have to grasp how the Egyptians saw the stars. Constellations weren't distant lights, they were the flesh and bones of deities, the visible echoes of myth. Orion wasn't just a hunter in the sky, he was Osiris resurrected, his belt a ladder to eternity. By claiming, "I am Orion," the soul didn't just compare itself to the god, it became him, borrowing his celestial authority. Tomb paintings from Luxor to Saqqara show this metamorphosis in vivid color. Ordinary men and women depicted with the golden skin of gods, crowned with solar discs or ostrich feathers, their poses mirroring Osiris's triumphant stance. But the spell's brilliance lay in its specificity. It didn't just invoke abstract divinity, it anchored the transformation in tangible cosmic phenomena. "My bones are the iron of the sky," one passage asserts, referencing meteorites, rare, indestructible objects the Egyptians believed were fragments of the god's realm. Another line commands the body to burn brighter than the dog star, aligning the soul with Sirius, whose annual rising heralded the Nile's life-giving flood. This was magic as astrophysics, a ritual merging the individual with the universe's most potent forces. Yet becoming an Ak wasn't just about glory, it was practical survival. Radiant beings didn't just wander the Duat, they commanded it. Demons who'd snarl at a mortal soul would kneel before a creature of light, hunger, thirst, exhaustion. Those were burdens of the flesh, and the Ak had shed them like a husk. A coffin text from the Middle Kingdom puts it bluntly: the Ak does not stumble. The Ak does not bleed. The Ak walks through walls of flame as though they are mist. The final step was the most profound. As the spell reached its crescendo, the soul declared itself the light that begets light, a self-sustaining force no longer dependent on earthly offerings or priestly prayers. This was the ultimate rebellion against death, not merely enduring, but evolving into something that defied the very concept of decay. And yet, even as a god, the journey wasn't over. The Duat's geography shifted like desert sands, and the next spell would be crucial, a guide to finding water in the underworld's lethal wastelands, where a single sip could mean the difference between radiance and ruin. Even in the afterlife, hunger and thirst were relentless enemies. The Duat wasn't just a realm of demons and trials, it was a desert, a place where the soul could wither without sustenance. Spell 6 of the Book of the Dead tackled this primal fear head-on, offering the deceased the power to conjure feasts from thin air. "Let bread rise before me like the sun over the Nile," the incantation begins. "Let beer foam in my cup as it did in the halls of my youth." These weren't just poetic wishes, they were commands backed by the same divine authority that made crops grow and rivers flood. The spell's imagery reveals a deep connection to Egypt's agricultural heartbeat. Mentions of barley, figs, and ox meat weren't arbitrary. They mirrored the offerings left in tombs, meant to sustain the Ka for eternity. But what happened when priests stopped replenishing those gifts, or grave robbers plundered them? That's where Spell 6 became a lifeline. It transformed the soul into its own provider, capable of summoning a table heavier than a king's banquet with a single utterance. One particularly vivid passage even describes the deceased plucking grapes from the walls of the Duat itself, as if the underworld's barren landscape could be tricked into fertility. Yet this wasn't just about survival. The act of creating food held symbolic weight. In Egyptian myth, the god Osiris taught humanity to cultivate wheat, tying agriculture to resurrection itself. By conjuring bread, the soul reenacted this divine gift, asserting its place in the cosmic order. Tomb art often shows the deceased seated before heaping platters, but Spell 6 goes further. It paints them as active participants, commanding the fields of the afterlife to bend to their will. The contrast to modern survival guides is striking. Today's manuals teach skills, how to purify water or trap game. The Book of the Dead bypassed labor entirely, offering instant abundance through words alone. But this luxury came with a caveat. Without precise pronunciation, the spell might summon rotten figs or bitter beer, a grim joke reflecting very real anxieties about famine. After all, what good was immortality if you spent it starving? And sustenance wasn't the only threat. The Duat's dangers grew more sinister with every step, from scorpion-tailed spirits to lakes of fire. Spell 6's final lines shift tone abruptly, warning of those who would steal the feast from your lips. This wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. Because in the underworld, even a loaf of bread could become a battlefield, and the next set of spells armed the soul for a very different kind of hunger, the hunger of things that fed on the unwary. The Duat wasn't just a gauntlet of physical trials. It was a battlefield of wills where souls clashed with unseen adversaries armed with curses older than the pyramids themselves. Spell 7 of the Book of the Dead was the ultimate counterattack, a shield against spectral sabotage. I repel the serpent with the flame of Ra wasn't just poetry, it was a war cry, channeling the sun god's victory over Apophis into a personal defense system. Imagine whispering words so potent they could turn back hostile magic like arrows bouncing off armor. This wasn't superstition, it was spiritual warfare, rooted in the very real fear that grudges didn't end at death. The Egyptians believed envy could stretch beyond the grave. A rival's curse cast in life might stalk you into the afterlife like a vengeful shadow. Tomb inscriptions sometimes warn of the enemy who speaks in darkness, a phrase that could mean anything from a jealous courtier to a slighted ancestor. Spell 7 exposed these threats, teaching the deceased to name the hidden foe and shatter their words like pottery beneath a chariot wheel. The language here is visceral, borrowing imagery from earthly battles to fight unseen forces. One papyrus even depicts the soul wearing an amulet shaped like Ra's solar bark, a literal vessel of divine power strapped to the chest, but the spell's brilliance lay in its adaptability. It didn't just block curses, it reversed them. A passage from the Papyrus of Ani instructs the deceased to catch the venom of your enemy's tongue and let it boil in their own belly. This mirrored the myth of Apophis, who choked on his own venom when Ra's light overwhelmed him. The message was clear: in the Duat, the best defense was turning an opponent's malice against them. Amulets played a crucial role. Archaeologists have found faience pendants engraved with Spell 7's key phrases, often buried near the mummy's throat, the gateway of speech and breath. These weren't mere decorations, they were tactical gear, designed to activate the moment a curse was detected. Some amulets layered Spell 7 with protective hieroglyphs resembling barbed wire, creating a metaphysical barrier around the soul. Yet amidst all this cosmic conflict, the spell held a quieter promise. By neutralizing hostility, it cleared the path for something far more precious: reunion. The final lines whisper of the embrace awaiting beyond the siege, hinting at spells that didn't just defend but restored. Because in the end, the greatest magic wasn't thwarting enemies, it was finding your way back to those who'd been waiting in the light. For all its trials and terrors, the Duat held one promise sweeter than any paradise: the chance to reunite with those who'd gone before. Spell 8 of the Book of the Dead wasn't about survival or power. It was about love, a whispered roadmap to the field of reeds where ancestors waited. May I embrace my father as the Nile embraces the shore, pleads one line comparing the souls longing to the river's eternal return, its floodwaters kissing the earth year after year. This wasn't just poetry, it was a lifeline thrown across the abyss of grief. The Egyptians didn't just believe in an afterlife, they believed in an after-family, a celestial household where bonds forged in life stretched unbroken into eternity. Tomb paintings often show families feasting together, husbands and wives seated side by side, children playing at their feet. But Spell 8 reveals the anxiety beneath these scenes. What if you couldn't find them in the vastness beyond death? The text reads like a desperate prayer crossed with a detective's notes, invoking landmarks, the sycamore where Hathor shades the weary, the bend in the river where the ibis wades, as if the Duat were a neighborhood where loved ones might have moved while you were away. Archaeologists have found copies of this spell tucked into burial wrappings, pressed against the mummy's hands or lips. One, written for a mother who'd lost 2 sons in a plague, includes added lines, "Let my boys recognize my voice as they did when I sang them to sleep." The specificity is heartbreaking. These weren't generic well-wishes, they were tailored reunions stitching personal memories into sacred text. Compare this to modern grief rituals. Today, we leave flowers or light candles gestures of remembrance, but not navigation. The ancient Egyptians went further, equipping their dead with verbal GPS coordinates to bypass celestial bureaucracy. "Tell Osiris my wife's name is Neferet, daughter of Amenhotep," instructs one scroll, preempting divine paperwork with bureaucratic savvy. Yet the spell's true power lay in its emotional alchemy. By framing loss as a temporary separation, a journey with a plotted reunion, it transformed despair into something actionable. Grief wasn't a void, it was a distance to be crossed, one incantation at a time. And as the soul neared its reward, the spells grew bolder, shifting from pleas to negotiations. Because why merely find your family when you could demand the gods themselves roll out the welcome mat? What if you could command the gods themselves not as a beggar pleading for mercy, but as an equal demanding service? Spell 9 of the Book of the Dead reveals this stunning audacity, where the deceased doesn't just pray to the gods but orders them. "Horus, carry me as you carried your father." Thunder's one passage, invoking the myth of the falcon god ferrying Osiris's body through the underworld. This wasn't arrogance, it was cosmic law. The Egyptians believed that words, spoken with perfect ritual precision, could bind even deities to action. Imagine the nerve of a mortal soul telling Thoth, "Record my name in your ledger now," or instructing Anubis, "Weigh my heart with your gentlest hand." The theology behind this is fascinating. Gods weren't distant tyrants in Egyptian belief, they were partners in maintaining Maat, the sacred order of the universe. Spells like these weren't blasphemy, they were collaborations. By citing divine precedent, "As you did for Osiris, do for me," the soul essentially filed a legal petition in the celestial court. One papyrus depicts a deceased woman named Tawasrit commanding Hathor to "nurse me as you nursed the infant Horus," framing herself as the goddess's divine charge. The accompanying illustration shows Hathor obligingly offering her breast, proving that even love could be contractually enforced in the afterlife. But the god's duties weren't just symbolic. Some spells assigned them brutal workloads. A text from the Ptolemaic period orders Sobek, the crocodile god, to "gnash the bones of my enemies between your teeth," while another recruits Sekhmet's lioness Fury to "burn away the demons that stalk my shadow." These weren't metaphors, they were job descriptions. The deceased became a spiritual general, deploying deities like an army against the underworld's horrors. What made this possible was the concept of heka, the same magic that powered the gods themselves. By wielding it correctly, a soul could temporarily borrow divine authority, like a civilian donning a general's uniform during wartime. The stakes: if the gods refused, the spell threatened cosmic consequences. Ra will find his bark stuck in the sand until you obey. This wasn't empty bravado. It was a nuclear option, implying the whole universe might grind to a halt if divine duties went unfulfilled. Yet Spell 9's boldest trick was its loophole for the final judgment. By commanding Thoth to write my name in ink that never fades, or Isis to speak for me when Osiris asks his questions, the soul rigged the trial in advance. Why beg for mercy when you could hire the prosecutor's wife as your defense attorney? But even this audacity paled next to the next spell, a secret so potent it didn't just influence the weighing of the heart, it hacked it, turning the scales into a puppet show where the soul held all the strings. The most audacious trick in the Book of the Dead wasn't just about surviving judgment, it was about rewriting the rules entirely. Spell 10, known as the Negative Confession, turned the solemn weighing of the heart into a high-stakes game of celestial deception. Picture this: standing before Osiris, the deceased would recite 42 denials. I have not stolen, I have not lied, I have not made anyone weep, each one aimed at the 42 divine judges lurking in the shadows. But here's the twist: these weren't honest admissions. They were incantations carefully crafted to manufacture innocence, whether the soul deserved it or not. The psychology behind this is fascinating. By vocalizing these denials, the speaker wasn't just claiming purity. They were invoking a kind of ritual magic where words could reshape reality. Think of it as a metaphysical plead the fifth, where silence might imply guilt, but recitation forged a new truth. Tomb illustrations show the deceased standing calmly beside the scales, their lips moving in perfect sync with the spell's words, while Amet, the devourer, growls impotently nearby. The hieroglyphs often float like a protective bubble around the scene, as if the very air conspired to sell the lie. But was this ethical? Scholars still debate whether the negative confession was moral guidance, a checklist for living virtuously, or the ultimate cheat code. Some versions of the spell include eyebrow-raising specifics like, I have not blocked the flow of a canal, or I have not eavesdropped, suggesting these were very real sins someone might have wanted to cover up. The Papyrus of Ani takes it further with added lines like, I am pure, I am pure, I am pure, repeated like a mantra, hammering the point home to any skeptical gods. Yet the spell's true genius lay in its timing. It wasn't just recited during judgment, it was woven into the mummy's wrappings, tucked under the heart scarab, ensuring the words physically vibrated against the organ being weighed. This was magic as engineering, a way to rig the scales through sheer proximity. And if Osiris saw through the ruse, the spell had a backup plan. Let Thoth, who loves truth, also love my words, essentially bribing the god of wisdom with flattery. But fooling the gods was only half the battle. However spotless the soul, it needed a vessel to return to, a body preserved against the ravages of time. That's where the next spells shifted focus, from the ethereal to the brutally physical, because even the cleverest soul was helpless if its earthly shell crumbled to dust. The transition from soul to body was where Egyptian magic became tangible, where whispered words met salted flesh and linen bandages. Spell 11 didn't just accompany mummification. It was mummification, a symphony of incantations timed to every cut, every drop of resin, every fold of cloth. Picture the embalmer's workshop, the air thick with myrrh, a priest hovering over the body with a papyrus in hand, chanting as Anubis himself might have done. Seal this flesh against the wrath of time, heat in tone, anointing the skin with oils that smelled of cedar and eternity. This wasn't medicine, it was alchemy, turning corruption into permanence through sheer force of language. The rituals were meticulously choreographed. As each organ was removed, liver, lungs, stomach, intestines, a different spell was recited, each invoking a protector god. The lungs, for example, belonged to Hapi, the baboon-headed guardian of the north, who'd breathe wind into these silent sacs once more, but the heart. That was the crown jewel, left inside the body or carefully preserved in a jar, depending on the era. and resting atop it like a sentinel was the heart scarab, a beetle-shaped amulet inscribed with spell 30 from the Book of the Dead. Its purpose was chillingly specific. "Do not rise against me in testimony," the hieroglyphs commanded, silencing the heart's potential confessions before Osiris's scales. Imagine a jury tampering so brazen it was etched in stone. Yet the real marvel was how these spells blurred the line between metaphor and mechanics. When priests wrapped the body in linen, they didn't just bandage, they enchanted, reciting spells that compared each layer to the petals of a lotus closing around the sun god at dusk. As Isis swaddled Horus from the desert's bite, so too do we swaddle this flesh from decay's teeth. They'd murmur, turning a mortuary into a theater of divine reenactment. Even the natron salts used to dehydrate the body had their own incantation. "Let the purity of the god's sweat dry this vessel for its voyage." But mummification was just the beginning. The same spells that preserved the body also mapped its celestial future. Scrawled inside coffins or painted on tomb walls, diagrams showed the deceased soaring as a falcon, sailing as a star, or even merging with the Milky Way. One spell from the late period describes the soul. "Unstitching the sky seems to walk where Nut's bones hold up the firmament." This wasn't poetry, it was cartography for the cosmos, giving the dead turn-by-turn directions through realms beyond human sight. And as the last bandage was tied, the final spell was spoken not to the mummy but to the tools. Knives, hooks, and jaws were ritually purified, their power discharged like spent bullets. Because in Egyptian magic, even objects had memory. A scalpel that touched death couldn't be allowed to remember its bite. The priests knew preservation wasn't just about defiance. It was preparation for a reunion where body and soul would meet again under a sky no longer bound by time. Sailing the solar bark wasn't just a privilege, it was the ultimate cosmic commute, a chance to ride shotgun with Ra himself as he battled through the underworld's 12 perilous hours of night. Spell 12 of the Book of the Dead didn't just ask for passage, it demanded it with the deceased declaring, "I stand at the helm brighter than the dawn." A line so audacious it blurred the line between passenger and deity. This was no pleasure cruise. The solar bark, a golden vessel crewed by gods and defended by fire, faced relentless attacks from Apophis, the serpent of chaos whose coils could crush the boat, and the sun itself into oblivion. To join this voyage meant signing up for a nightly war, where the stakes were nothing less than the rebirth of the world. The spell's instructions read like a celestial survival manual. "Beware the spine breaker," it warns, referencing a demon lurking near the 4th hour of night, whose touch could snap a soul's backbone like dry reeds. But the deceased wasn't helpless. Armed with the names of every oarsman and the exact moment to duck, when the scorpion's tail blocks the moon's eye, they could navigate the boat's deck like a seasoned sailor. Tomb ceilings across Egypt mapped this journey in stunning detail. In the burial chamber of Ramesses VI, a sprawling star chart plots the bark's route hour by hour, with hieroglyphic annotations labeling safe zones and danger points like a divine GPS. One section near the 7th hour shows Ra's boat passing through a corridor of floating knives, a trial where the spell instructs the soul to become lighter than a heron's feather, avoiding the blades by sheer spiritual weightlessness. But the true genius of Spell 12 lies in its layered symbolism. The solar bark wasn't just a vehicle, it was a microcosm of creation. Its crew mirrored the universe's balance, Thoth calculating the boat's course with celestial math, Mat adjusting the sails to keep the winds of order taut, while the deceased, now a temporary god, helped row with oars made of sunlight. Each night's voyage reenacted the first sunrise, with Ra's victory over Apophis ensuring dawn would come again. By participating, the soul didn't just witness resurrection, it fueled it, its chants adding strength to Ra's aging arms as he fought the serpent. Yet survival required more than navigation. The spell's climax shifts from evasion to outright dominion, teaching the deceased to wear the sun as a cloak and command the river of flames. This wasn't metaphor. Tomb illustrations show souls literally absorbing Ra's light, their bodies glowing like molten gold as they harnessed the bark's elemental forces. A papyrus from Deir el-Medina depicts a deceased woman named Henatmayet standing knee-deep in the boat's fiery wake, her arms raised not in fear but in triumph as she channels its heat into a weapon against the demons below. And as the bark neared dawn, the spell's final lines hinted at an even greater power, the ability to bend the elements themselves, to make the wind kneel and silence the storm's tongue. Because why merely survive the cosmos when you could, even briefly, command it? The next spells wouldn't just protect the soul, they'd arm it with the raw forces of creation, turning the afterlife's chaos into a playground for the divine. If the solar bark was the vehicle, then Spell 13 handed the deceased the keys not just to ride, but to steer the very forces of creation. I spit the hurricane back to Seth. Wasn't hyperbole, it was a battle cry ripped straight from the cosmic war between order and chaos. This spell transformed the soul into a tempest wielder, capable of hurling gales at demons or dousing underworld fires with a whispered command. The imagery here is visceral. Let my breath be the north wind that flattens reeds, declares one passage echoing the myth of Shu, the god who held storms in his palms like rains. But this wasn't just about brute force, it was about precision. A vignette from the Papyrus of Nu shows the deceased directing flames like a conductor, sculpting fire into a shield against Apophyse's venom while leaving allies unscathed. The parallels to Seth, the god of storms and violence, are deliberate. In Egyptian myth, Seth didn't just create chaos, he embodied it, tearing apart the sky with thunder and sandstorms. By invoking his name only to defy him, the spell turned the enemy's strength against him, a psychological masterstroke. What Seth scatters, I gather. What he burns, I cool. The text asserts, framing elemental control as moral victory. Tomb paintings from the New Kingdom depict this duality. Souls standing waist-deep in underworld rivers, not drowning but parting the waters like curtains, while fiery whirlwinds kneel obediently at their feet. Modern fantasy tropes pale in comparison. Wizards flinging fireballs, the Egyptians envisioned something far subtler, a dialogue with the elements, where wind and flame weren't just tools but allies. The storm knows my name claims one incantation, suggesting a relationship deeper than domination. Archaeologists have found amulets shaped like tiny whirlwinds, inscribed with Spell 13's key phrases, meant to be clutched in the mummy's hand. These weren't trinkets, they were interfaces, physical anchors for metaphysical control. Yet the true power lay in the spell's flexibility, need to cross a lake of fire. Let the flames become stepping stones, cornered by shadow beasts. Turn my shadow into a blade. This was magic as improvisation, where creativity mattered as much as memorization. But for all its spectacle, Spell 13 was merely the prelude to an even greater secret one that didn't just bend the elements, but time itself, rewriting the rules of existence with a single, whispered syllable. Time wasn't a straight line in the Egyptian afterlife. It was a wheel, a cycle that could be spun backward with the right words. Spell 14 of the Book of the Dead held this dizzying power, the ability to become the newborn sun, to shed age like a serpent shedding skin. The Incantations imagery pulses with rebirth cicadas emerging from the earth after years of darkness, the moon waxing anew after vanishing into shadow. Let my wrinkles smooth as the Nile floods the fields, it commands. Let my bones drink marrow as the palm tree drinks dawn. This wasn't poetic metaphor, it was a surgical reversal of decay, a defiance of entropy written in hieroglyphs as precise as a medical textbook. The spell's genius lay in its grounding in natural phenomena the Egyptians observed relentlessly. Cicadas, buried for years before clawing into the light, weren't just insects, they were living proof that time could be cheated. Lunar cycles, with their monthly disappearance and resurgence, modeled the rhythm of resurrection. By invoking these patterns, the deceased didn't just ask for renewal, they insisted on it, leveraging the universe's own logic against mortality. A tomb painting in Thebes captures this perfectly. A man with gray-streaked hair stands beside his own youthful portrait, his hands raised not in prayer but in command, as if ordering his cells to realign. Modern science echoes this in unexpected ways. Quantum physics theories about time's fluidity, how particles can exist in multiple states until observed, mirror the Egyptian view of time as malleable under divine will. Alchemists later chased this same dream, their quest for the philosopher's stone rooted in the belief that matter could be perfected, that lead could remember being gold. Spell 14 predates them all, a sacred algorithm for rewinding existence, yet the spell's boldest claim wasn't about the body, it was about memory. Let me remember every name I've ever carried. It demands, suggesting identity could persist even as the self shed its years. This wasn't just rejuvenation, it was a paradox, a soul simultaneously ancient and infant, wise and innocent. The implications ripple outward. If time could be reversed, then judgment, legacy, even grief could be undone. A mother might meet her child again, not as shades in the field of reeds, but as they were in life, laughing whole, unburdened by death's chronology. And as the soul mastered time, it hungered for something even more profound, the knowledge hidden in the gods' own minds. The next spells wouldn't just bend reality, they'd crack open the cosmos, demanding secrets no mortal was meant to know. Names held power in ancient Egypt, not just titles or epithets, but the secret, true names whispered by the gods at the moment of creation. Spell 15 of the Book of the Dead didn't just request divine favor, it demanded it, armed with knowledge so potent it could bend even the mightiest deity to the speaker's will. I know you, Osiris, by the name your mother cried at dawn. The spell begins, a verbal key fitting the lock of eternity. This wasn't prayer, it was diplomacy by way of blackmail, leveraging celestial secrets as bargaining chips. The most famous example, the myth of Isis and Ra. As the story goes, the sun god grew old, his power waning as drool trickled from his lips. Isis, the cunning goddess of magic, gathered this divine saliva, mixed it with clay, and fashioned a venomous serpent. When the creature bit Ra, she offered a cure, but only if he revealed his true name, the source of his power. Ra groaned out titles like Khepri at dawn and Autumn at dusk, but Isis refused. Finally, in agony, he whispered the name hidden beneath all others, and with it, Isis gained authority even over the king of the gods. Spell 15 operates on the same principle. It doesn't just list divine names, it extracts them through riddles and psychological warfare. One passage instructs the deceased to flatter Anubis as the jackal who outruns death, then pivots sharply. But your true name is he who sniffs the darkness, is it not? The sudden specificity, like a detective cornering a suspect, leaves the god no choice but to concede. Other names are teased out through mythic parallels. As Horus knew the name of the serpent that bit him, so I know yours, O guardian of the third gate. The soul declares, bluffing with the confidence of a high-stakes gambler. The implications were staggering. If a mortal could speak a god's hidden name, they could, for a moment, wear that god's authority. Tomb carvings show deceased nobles holding scrolls inscribed with these names like skeleton keys, their lips parted mid-command. One spell from the Ptolemaic period even claims knowledge of Thoth's secret name grants the weight of the moon in your hands, letting the soul recalibrate the scales of judgment itself. Yet this power came with risks. Names weren't just passwords, they were living things vibrating with the essence of their owners. To misuse one was to risk divine retribution, a lesson etched into the tale of a scribe who carved Isis's true name onto an amulet without purification rites. The text claims his hands rotted like old fruit within hours. Spell 15 accounts for this, layering protections. Let the name burn my tongue if I speak it with malice. It cautions a self-inflicted curse to prove goodwill. As the soul mastered these secrets, the final spells beckoned, ones that didn't just borrow divine power but embodied it, because why merely know a god's name when you could, however briefly, become one? Among the most mesmerizing transformations in the Book of the Dead was the soul's ability to dissolve into nature itself, not just as a spectator, but as a living embodiment of its cycles. Spell 16 didn't just promise rebirth, it enacted it, turning the deceased into a blue lotus rising from the primordial waters. I unfold my petals in the dawn's first light. The incantation begins, painting the soul as a flower breaking the surface, its roots still tangled in the underworld's depth. This wasn't mere poetry. The blue lotus, revered for its hypnotic fragrance and rumored hallucinogenic properties, was a living metaphor for resurrection, closing itself at night only to emerge anew each morning, untouched by the darkness that briefly swallowed it. The spell's brilliance lay in its biological precision. Just as the lotus draws nourishment from murky waters while remaining pristine, the soul could navigate the Duat's horrors without corruption. Tomb murals from the New Kingdom show this metamorphosis in vivid detail. Human figures with stems for limbs, their faces emerging from golden blossoms, their fingers stretching into leaves that catch the first rays of rose bark. One particularly striking vignette in the Papyrus of Amet depicts the scribe's bar, his bird-shaped soul perched on a lotus, its beak tucked into the flower's center as if drinking eternity itself. But the lotus was more than a symbol of resilience. Its narcotic qualities, well documented in temple rituals, suggest the Egyptians understood altered states as gateways to divine knowledge. Priests who brewed lotus tea weren't just seeking visions, they were reenacting the soul's journey, using chemistry to mimic transcendence. Spell 16 hints at this duality, urging the deceased to drink the sky's reflection in my cup, a line that could describe both a flower's dew and a shaman's brew. The deeper magic here was the lotus's connection to Nun, the chaotic waters that existed before creation. By rooting itself in these depths while blooming in the realm of light, the flower became a bridge between opposites, order and chaos, death and life. The spell capitalizes on this, instructing the soul to be the stem that holds the worlds apart. It's a staggering image, the deceased as cosmic architecture, their transformed body the axis on which existence turns. Yet this was only one thread in a tapestry of metamorphoses. Other spells allowed the soul to become a heron skimming the Nile's surface, a scarab pushing the sun across the sky, even a crocodile lurking in the reeds, each form a strategic tool for navigating the afterlife's hazards. A late-period papyrus describes a woman named Tasharit transforming into a swallow to evade demonic gatekeepers, her wings writing escape in the air's own language. The lesson was clear: identity in the afterlife wasn't fixed. It was fluid, adaptable, a series of masks donned and discarded as needed. And as the soul mastered these transformations, the spells grew bolder, shifting from survival tactics to something far more profound, a merger with the cosmos itself, where the boundaries between self and star, breath and wind dissolved into pure, radiant awareness. The ultimate liberation wasn't just becoming one with the gods, it was dissolving into the fabric of existence itself. Spell 17 of the Book of the Dead marks this breathtaking climax where the soul sheds its last ties to individuality, merging with the infinite all-ness of Autumn, the primordial god who existed before time. I am the flood, the star, the silence, the text proclaims, lines so abstract they seem to defy translation. But look closer. The flood here isn't just water, it's the Nile's annual resurrection, the unstoppable surge of life that rewrites the land. The star isn't a distant light, it's the unblinking eye of Ra fixed in the eternal present. And the silence, that's the hush before creation, the moment before autumn spoke the universe into being. This wasn't poetry, it was alchemy, turning the soul into concepts too vast for tombs or temples to contain. The parallels to Eastern philosophies are striking. Like Buddhist nirvana, this spell promised release from the wheel of rebirth, no more judgments, no more duat, just pure being. Yet the Egyptian approach was startlingly tactile. Where nirvana often implies transcendence of the physical, Spell 17 embraces it, equating the soul with tangible forces. I am the heat in the forge, the salt in the tear, the weight in the stone. Even in annihilation, there's a reverence for the material world, a refusal to dismiss it as illusion. Modern physics echoes this in unexpected ways. Quantum entanglement, where particles mirror each other across impossible distances, feels eerily close to the spell's claim that the soul could be in two places without dividing. The Egyptians may not have had the math, but they grasped the principle, unity without uniformity. Archaeological evidence reveals how deeply this idea resonated. In the tomb of Osiris, a high priest from the late period, the ceiling isn't painted with stars, it's covered in thousands of tiny, identical figures, each labeled the Osiris Osiris. This wasn't egomania, it was a visual representation of the spell's promise, showing the deceased replicated in every atom of the cosmos. Elsewhere, sarcophagi bear inscriptions like, I am the breath between the falcon's wings, suggesting a soul so dispersed it could inhabit the motion of flight itself. What's revolutionary is how this final transformation reframes the entire journey. Earlier spells armed the soul with passwords and amulets, but Spell 17 discards them all. No need to outwit demons when you are the darkness they fear. No scales to balance when your heart has become the weight that holds the universe in equilibrium. Even the gods fade from view not as superiors, but as temporary shapes in a greater flow. The Papyrus of Ani captures this in a stunning vignette. Ani's figure dissolves into a swirl of hieroglyphs that morph into birds, waves, and finally, blank space. Not emptiness, but potential. The ultimate cheat code wasn't conquering death. It was ceasing to be something that death could touch. And yet, for all its grandeur, this spell whispers a profoundly human question. If we're willing to vanish so completely, what does that say about the lives we cling to so fiercely? The Egyptians built pyramids to last millennia, yet their most sacred text ends not with monuments, but with letting go. Perhaps that's the final paradox. The closer we get to eternity, the more it asks us to release everything, even the desire to endure. As the last line of Spell 17 fades from the papyrus, it leaves not an answer but an invitation to wonder, to seek, and finally, to dissolve into the mystery. For centuries, the Book of the Dead lay buried not just in tombs, but in obscurity, its secrets crumbling into dust beneath the desert. Then came the 19th century, when adventurers and scholars cracked open Egypt's past like a pharaoh's sealed sarcophagus. Among them, E. A. Wallace Budge, a self-taught linguist with a knack for hieroglyphs, painstakingly translated these spells for the first time, unleashing them onto Victorian society like a thunderclap. Imagine the shock-starched collar academics and pious churchgoers confronted with incantations that promised to hack the afterlife, to command gods, to defy death itself. Budge's translations weren't just academic curiosities. They were grenades tossed into the rigid moral order of the era, sparking debates about faith, magic, and the nature of the soul. Hollywood couldn't resist. From Boris Karloff's iconic 1932 portrayal of Imhotep muttering from a stolen scroll to Brendan Fraser dodging cursed priests in the 1999 blockbuster The Mummy, the Book of the Dead became shorthand for ancient, forbidden power. These films got the drama right, the terror of a mispronounced spell, the allure of resurrection, but missed the deeper truth. For the Egyptians, this wasn't about raising zombies. It was about preserving identity, about ensuring that the soul retained its name, its memory, itself in a universe bent on erasure. The real horror wasn't a reanimated corpse, but oblivion, a fate worse than any Hollywood monster. Yet the spells didn't stay trapped in museums or movie screens. Modern neo-pagans and spiritual seekers have reclaimed them, not as literal instructions for the afterlife, but as tools for mindfulness and transformation. Picture a yoga studio in Brooklyn, where a teacher guides students through a meditation inspired by Spell 17. I am the flood, the star, the silence, reimagining dissolution into the cosmos as a release from modern anxiety. Or a witch's altar in Portland, where a handwritten copy of the Negative Confession sits beside crystals, reframed as a mantra for ethical living. The irony is delicious. Texts meant to navigate the Duat now help navigate rush hour traffic and existential dread. Which raises the final, tantalizing question: do these spells still work? Not in the literal sense. Few today expect to confront Amet with a papyrus in hand, but as psychological armor, as poetic resistance against the chaos of existence. When a grieving parent whispers, "I will not be parted from my child," from Spell 8, or an activist channels the defiance of, "I repel the serpent with the flame of Ra," something shifts. The power was never just in the words, but in the audacity to speak them, to stare into the void and declare, "I am not afraid." 3,000 years later, that's a spell worth remembering.